Most of us, when we think of India, think of the great civilization that produced such beautiful buildings as the Taj Mahal, and which has a long tradition of sophisticated music and sculpture and painting. And of course, the vast majority of the people who live in India belong to that civilization. But in the remoter hills and forests, particularly of the Deccan in southern India, there also live a quite different people, quite unrelated people, the hill tribes, people such as these. 20 years ago, the hill tribes of the Deccan were relatively unchanged by the civilization around them. But since then, roads have been driven into their territory, and the whole place has been opened up, and many of their old ways have been lost or forgotten. But fortunately, 20 years ago, two people were living among them, photographing and filming them, Mr. and Mrs. Haimendorf. Professor Haimendorf, why did you select the Deccan for your research?
I decided to spend a year in the Deccan. I thought that it would be important to study these very primitive jungle tribes, the most primitive in India. It turned out that I spent there 5 years because while I was there the war broke out.
And your wife was with you?
Yes, she was with me. We were just very newly married, spending a honeymoon in the jungle, so to say.
A honeymoon that turned out to be 5 years.
5 years. Record that must be.
How did you find living amongst these strange people? Because it was your first field trip, wasn't it?
Oh, well, I enjoyed it very much. And it was, it was fun.
Are they difficult to get to know?
Oh, no. Very easy to get to know. Much easier to live among rarely than to live in a civilized town in the West.
Professor Haimendorf, where in the Deccan were you based?
We made our base in Hyderabad, and from there we went on several expeditions in different directions. But first we went south to the Kistna River.
During the hot season, the wooded hills flanking the deep gorge of the Kistna River are scorched and dusty. The trees are leafless, and the grass covering the stony ground is dry and yellow. Here, there are no roads, and it's the difficulty of crossing this country which has prevented the spread of civilization from the nearby cities and kept the tribes living in the interior truly primitive. The Haimendorfs needed a column of porters to carry their food and equipment. Minor rivers are easily forded, but the crossing of the Kistna River presented a more serious problem. They swam across, but their equipment and cameras had to be ferried over on an airbed. Although they didn't know it at the time, there are lots of crocodiles in this river. Their Indian servant and interpreter was a non-swimmer and had to be rafted across too. It was only after everyone had reached the other side safely that their porters happened to mention the presence of crocodiles. After several days searching in the parched forests, the expedition found at last a group of Chenchu people. The Haimendorfs wanted particularly to study this tribe, and it had not been easy to contact them, for they're nomads continually on the move. They're also among the most primitive of India's aboriginal people, and live today as prehistoric man must have lived 10,000 years ago. In physical type, they seem to be quite unrelated to the three main racial groups in the world: European, Negroid, and Mongoloid. To some extent, they resemble the Aborigines of Australia, but they're most certainly entirely distinct from the advanced and civilized populations of India. Their dwellings are merely flimsy structures made of branches, leaves, and grass, and they lead a truly hand-to-mouth existence, eating the food as they gather it in the forest, and never accumulating any store to last them through a lean period. Digging in the forest for wild edible roots and tubers is the principal occupation of all Chenchus. When wild fruits are in season, men and boys climb the trees and perch in the branches, eating their fill like monkeys. Then they beat down berries which are picked up by the children and older folk. For several months, the Haimendorfs lived with the Chenchus, but they found it difficult to gather information from them, since the people had to spend most of their day in the forest, collecting food, if they were not to starve. Only by providing daily rations of grain, which had been brought on the backs of porters from the plains, was it possible to persuade some of the men to stay in one place for a few days. But by making these gifts, the anthropologists were able to learn a great deal about the life and tribal customs of these hitherto little-known people. For 3 weeks every year, when certain fruits are in the forest are ripe, the Chenchus have abundant food and drink, and then they dance. Drums are dried and tuned over a fire, and homemade liquor is handed round. Each dancer moves more or less independently of the rest. It's a primitive dance, reminiscent of some of the paintings left by Stone Age man in the caves of France and Spain. The Chenchus are keen hunters, and the most lively dance is one with bow and arrow. This may well have originated as a magic ritual intended to influence the outcome of the hunt. You pretend to kill an animal in the dance and so bring it under your spell. Then, when you go out into the forest, you will kill your prey in fact. The Chenchus hunt squirrels, hares, birds, and sometimes even deer, stag, and wild pig. In search of small game, they throw sticks at the branches of trees. The monsoon rains have transformed the forest into a tangle of creepers and luxuriant tree growth. The Chenchu's bow is their only weapon. It's made of bamboo, and their arrows are tipped with iron, which the Chenchus barter from the people of the nearby plains. Resting from the chase, the hunters drink water from cups made of large leaves. They don't make pots themselves, and so such leaf cups are the most usual drinking vessels. After several months with these primitive people, the Haimendorfs set out in search of another tribe, the Reddies, who live in the jungle-covered hills on both sides of the Godavari River. Most Reddy settlements lie in the depths of the forest and can be approached only by narrow footpaths. This is the village which the Haimendorfs decided finally was the one in which to settle in order to make their studies of the people. They had brought with them presents of tobacco for their hosts and discussed the possibility of getting a hut built. The study of the Reddy tribe was to take them nearly a year, and so they had to establish themselves as regular residents of a Reddy village. The Reddies are more advanced than the Chenchus, both in their way of life and in physical type. Before long, a hut was built, and the Haimendorfs settled down to the routine of anthropological work, taking notes, writing down legends, and observing customs. As the months passed, they also acquired some pets, a baby hare, which they reared on banana. Their domestic cat later adopted the hare and kept it with her own litter of kittens. Reddy children have to be independent very early on. These boys were preparing a feast of roast rats, grilling them on bamboo spits till they were brown and crisp. The Reddies are not, like the Chenchus, nomadic hunters and food gatherers, entirely dependent on wild produce. They're cultivators, but their cultivation is of the most primitive kind. Every year they fell and burn a patch in the forest, and then the men drop grains of millets into holes made with long dibbling sticks. A pig is caught to be sacrificed to Mother Earth with prayers for good crops. Dogs help to corner the beast so that it can be trussed and carried on a pole to a sacrificial place deep in the forest. The prayers of the farmers have been answered. The millet stands 8 feet tall and has to be guarded against the ravages of monkeys and parrots. In every field, a high platform is erected. At night, it's manned by the owner, and during the day, by one or other of his children. From this vantage point, stones can be slung at the thieving birds. Sometimes a bamboo clapper, manipulated by a long cane rope, is used to scare off larger marauders such as deer and wild pig. After the harvest, the Reddies have the leisure for festivals and celebrations. This boat is bringing a bridal party from a village on the opposite bank of the Godavari. Normally, the wedding takes place in the groom's village, and friends and relations are invited from near and far. Women in white saris conduct a bride to the village. They're received with drums and pipes, and their foreheads are marked with red powder for good fortune. This is to be a double wedding, and 2 bridegrooms are led to the marriage booth under an improvised canopy. One of them is a mere boy. While the ceremony continues, women fetch water, for the bride and groom must be given a ceremonial bath. Meanwhile, the boiled millet and the goat curry for the wedding feast stew in large cooking pots. This couple have probably seen each other only once or twice before. Their elders have arranged the marriage. The plates for the wedding feast are made from large leaves. The bride and groom have to undergo 3 ceremonial baths. In the final bathing, the water must flow from the groom over the bride. Next, the pair are anointed with sweet-smelling oil. The guests celebrate the end of the ceremony with dancing and with drumming. Haimendorfs were also given a share of the wedding feast. After a year with these people, their time was coming to an end, and soon they had to leave. The next season, they undertook a third trip, this time using not porters to carry their goods, but carts drawn by buffaloes and bullocks. Their first objective was the Koya tribe, and in particular, they hoped to witness the strange bison dance, which only the Koyas performed. At the first Koya village they came to, they watched a Koya palm tapper climb a Karyota palm to collect the juice, which, when fermented, provides palm wine, the favorite drink of both Koyas and Reddies. It's very rich in vitamin C, but that, of course, isn't why they drink it. The Koyas live in a part of the country which must once have been the scene of a more advanced civilization than theirs, for gigantic stone graves, now enclosed in dense forest, bear witness to people who buried their dead under these huge dolmens. These stones are so heavy that hundreds of men were needed to move them in order that the contents of the graves beneath could be examined. Even now, it is not known exactly who the builders of these ancient monuments were, but metal implements found in the coffins suggest that they lived in the early Indian Iron Age some 2,500 years ago. To their great disappointment, the Haimendorfs learned that they had arrived at the wrong time for the bison dance. But they could stay no longer, for they had to move on to visit the fourth of the tribes which they had listed specially for study, the Bondo. The Bondos live in the mountains, and they differ from their neighbors above all in the appearance of their women, who shave their heads, and who wear loads of heady ornaments, but only diminutive skirts. More as a sport and a relaxation than as a means of adding to their diet, the Bondo women fish with baskets in the streams and flooded rice fields. But the fish they catch are very small indeed. Each spring, men set out on a ritual hunt, carrying bows and arrows. It's necessary that at least one animal shall be caught and killed on this day to ensure good hunting in the coming year. Next, a ceremony is performed to protect the village from the demons of disease. First, the man purifies himself with water. Fire is produced to light the incense. And the priest asks the blessings of the good spirits. Nehi and his assistants lead a sacrificial white goat round an assembly of women and children. The evil spirits are to be bought off with the life of this goat. A ritual pattern of lines and squares serving as an altar is drawn on the ground, and the goat is made to stand in front of it. The priest scatters offerings of grain. The carcass is carried away. The hair is singed off. The skin is cleaned with water, and then the flesh is cooked for the sacrificial meal of which the whole village partakes. On the edge of the Bondo country flows the Machkund River. Its swirling waters leap in one great fall into a deep gorge. Mrs. Haimendorf reconnoiters the way through this gorge, to the north of which lies the country of the Gadaba tribe. The crossing turned out to be much easier than at first seemed likely. They arrived in the Gadaba country in time for a weekly market. It was attended by members of several local tribes, including Gadabas and Bondos, who came to sell their agricultural produce and buy such commodities as pots and salt and spices and cloth and cheap jewelry. Heavily laden with purchases, the tribesmen leave for their own villages. This is the time of the year when the rice fields are prepared for cultivation. Men and boys are busy repairing the dams and shifting the earth as they remodel the shape of terraces. Water is channeled into fields through long ducts, and when the soil is soft and slushy, then the Gadabas begin the work of ploughing. Rice seed, which has already sprouted, is sown in seed beds, but in other places the seedlings are ready for transplanting. It is woman's work to pull up the young plants and tie them into bundles. Then the men and boys carry these bundles balanced on long poles to the fields, where large numbers of women have assembled for the work of planting. An owner must feed all those who engage in work on his fields, and great quantities of rice have been prepared for this outdoor meal. There's a leaf bowl for each worker. Young girls and women serve the food to the seated guests. Bondo women have also come to help their neighbors, the Gadabas, in the planting. People from the two tribes, so different in their dress and custom, sit and eat together. They're so friendly that in fact intermarriage between the two tribes is not uncommon. Late in the afternoon, the young people of both sexes gather for an evening's entertainment. Suddenly, there is a stir. The line of dancing girls is broken, and one swaying figure separates herself from the rest of the company. A goddess has taken possession of her spirit. Some of her companions hasten to break her trance. They wave burning incense round her head and throw water over her. But the goddess is not to be so easily dismissed. The girl possessed violently resists. The goddess chooses her own time to depart. The trance ends and the girl returns to her own consciousness. It was soon after this that the Haimendorfs unexpectedly got the exciting news that a performance of the bison dance was about to take place in the Koya country. And so they hurried back to the people they had visited 6 months earlier. Once more, they crossed the Godavari. It is not so long since the Koyas hunted wild bison with bows and arrows. And although the animals have now become rare, headdresses bearing a pair of bison horns are still in the possession of individual families. Dancers wearing such headdresses imitate the movements of fighting bison bulls and beat out the rhythm on their great cylindrical drums. The Haimendorfs were unable to discover the true meaning and significance of this strange dance. The dancers themselves were unable to explain it, and said only that they danced in this way simply because their ancestors had done so before them. Judging from similar dances performed by other primitive people, it seems likely that this ritual was designed to increase the fertility of the bison, on whose flesh the Koyas were once dependent for food. But if this was so, the Koya tribe had forgotten it. Today, 20 years after this film was taken, the Koyas no longer perform even the dance itself, for civilization has penetrated deep into their country and radically altered their way of life. Indeed, it's likely that this film is the only surviving visual record of this strange ritual of a tribe that was once among the most primitive in all India.